Ramirez was terrible at the game. Not because he couldn't fight. That would be a ridiculous thing to say about Juan Sánchez-Villalobos Ramirez. He was thousands of years old. He had survived long enough to become one of the most experienced immortals we ever meet. And according to Graham Ashe, Ramirez didn't just learn swordsmanship, he perfected techniques that other immortals were still studying more than a century after his death. No, Ramirez was terrible at the game for a much simpler reason. He kept helping the competition. Think about what he tells Connor. Eventually, there can be only one. Every other immortal is potentially the person who takes your head. So the sensible thing to do would be to keep your mouth shut. Don't explain the rules, don't teach him how to fight. Definitely don't take some recently resurrected Scotsman who barely understands what he is and spend your time turning him into someone who might eventually be capable of killing you. Ramirez does exactly that. And I don't think that's because he misunderstood the game. I think it's because he understood something more important than winning it. Because before Ramirez ever meets Connor MacLeod, this man has lived an absurd amount of life. He arrives in Scotland calling himself Juan Sánchez-Villalobos Ramirez, chief metallurgist to King Charles V of Spain. Connor naturally assumes he's Spanish, but no, he's Egyptian. Of course he is. He's an Egyptian man with a Spanish name serving the Spanish crown, carrying a Japanese sword into Scotland, and somehow Sean Connery's accent is still the least confusing part of this arrangement. But underneath all of that theatricality is someone who actually earned the confidence. Ramirez is old. In the film, he tells Connor he's 2,437 years old. And even Ramirez had teachers. The television series gives us one of the best pieces of information about him years after Connery finished with the role. In 1657, Duncan MacLeod trains with Graham Ashe. Duncan assumes one of the techniques Ashe is teaching him belongs to Ashe.
It was really Juan Ramirez who perfected it.
You knew Juan Sánchez-Villalobos Ramirez? Mm-hmm. Connor's teacher?
Then Ashe reveals something even better. Ramirez had been his student. That matters because it strips away some of the mythology. Ramirez wasn't born knowing everything. Somebody taught him. He learned, he practiced, he got better. Then he took what he had been given and passed it on. And somewhere during those thousands of years, Ramirez also learned that immortality can hurt you without ever coming near your neck. Her name was Shikiko. She was his third wife, a Japanese princess. And her father, Masamune, a genius by the way, gave Ramirez the sword that would eventually become inseparable from Connor MacLeod. Ramirez tells Connor that Shikiko died. And for a man that spends most of the movie behaving like absolutely nothing on earth can embarrass him, frighten him, or make him shut up, this is where you finally see the wound. He outlived her, and it broke something in him badly enough that centuries later, he's still trying to save Connor from experiencing the same thing. So he tells Connor to leave Heather, not because he doesn't understand love, because he understands exactly where this particular love story ends. Heather grows old, Connor doesn't. Heather dies, Connor survives. Ramirez has already lived that ending. He thinks he's giving Connor wisdom. Connor thinks the time with Heather is worth what comes afterwards, and Connor stays. That's important because Ramirez teaches Connor how to survive, but Connor doesn't accept every lesson Ramirez gives him about how to live. Ramirez can teach swordsmanship, and he can explain the quickening, he can explain the gathering, he can explain the stars, the pinholes, and the curtain of night, and he can tell Connor what happens when an immortal loses his head. But he cannot make Connor protect himself from grief the same way Ramirez did. And maybe Connor was right, because by the time Ramirez meets him, there are little signs that this ancient, cultured, sophisticated man is not exactly spending his immortality maintaining a safe emotional distance from people. He's having way too much fun. By this point in the movie, he's also calling Connor pendejo, insulting his food, mocking him during training, and generally behaving like irritating this confused Highlander is one of the benefits of the job. This isn't some solemn old master floating above humanity. Ramirez likes people. He likes food, he likes clothes, he likes women, he likes showing off, and he likes screwing with Connor. And I'm fairly certain that Ramirez would approve of the fact that I spent the first half of this video pretending this episode was about his swordsmanship, because it ain't. It's about what he does with it. There's supplementary material that makes Ramirez's history as a teacher even messier. Watcher-derived accounts have connected him to Octavio Consone, the Spanish immortal who later teaches Duncan. That connection isn't established cleanly enough on screen for me to treat it as unquestioned canon, and Consone is exactly the kind of man who demonstrates why Ramirez couldn't control what his students eventually became. But Connor is different because Connor is the student we actually watch Ramirez choose, and Ramirez knows what's coming. The Kurgan. This is not an opponent that Ramirez underestimates. He knows exactly how dangerous the Kurgan is. The surviving screenplay even gives their history more depth than the finished movie does, describing earlier confrontations across Babylon, Greece, and China. Whether you're only looking at the film or including that screenplay material, the conclusion is the same. Ramirez knows the Kurgan is better than Connor. At this point, he's probably better than Ramirez, and if the Kurgan wins the prize, everyone loses. So Ramirez does something that makes absolutely no sense if his highest priority is being the last immortal alive. He creates another contender. He teaches Connor how to protect his head. He improves his footwork. He teaches him how to use the sword. He explains the quickening. He teaches him the rules that nobody bothered to explain after Connor woke up from the dead. He warns him about the Kurgan, and he tells him what kind of a man is coming for him. And when Connor wants to know how somebody defeats a man like that, Ramirez doesn't give him a secret technique. He says, heart, faith, and steel. That answer tells us almost everything about him, because eventually the Kurgan does come. Connor isn't there, and Ramirez has to face him. And Ramirez loses, but not cleanly. He cuts the Kurgan's throat badly enough to leave a scar that follows him all the way to the final battle with Connor. And then Kurgan takes Ramirez's head. If this were only a story about who won the fight, that's where Ramirez's story ends. He failed. He failed. The Kurgan survived, Ramirez didn't. But years later, Connor walks into the gathering carrying Ramirez with him. Literally, he's carrying Shikiko's father's sword. The weapon passed from Masamune to Ramirez, and from Ramirez to Connor. But Connor is carrying more than the sword. Everything Ramirez taught him is there too. The rules, the training, the warning, the understanding that the Kurgan cannot be allowed to win. And then, Connor MacLeod does what Ramirez couldn't. He kills the Kurgan. And that's why I don't think Ramirez was bad at the game after all. I think he rejected its most obvious assumptions. There can be only one tells every immortal that everybody else is eventually an enemy. Ramirez looked at Connor and decided that wasn't the most important part. Because maybe Ramirez wins. Maybe Connor wins. Maybe neither of them do. But if the final choice is between making yourself slightly safer and making sure someone capable of stopping the Kurgan exists, Ramirez makes his decision. And he makes it knowing exactly what it could eventually cost him. He teaches Connor anyway. Ramirez never got to kill him. He made sure Connor had the chance.